Well, now to look more into the G20, US's absence and South Africa's stance with other global leaders at the summit is Joy John, who is a global affairs analyst. Let's talk briefly about the G20 summit and the US's absence at the critical meeting in South Africa. Good to have you this weekend. Seems like we're matching and you got the memo. Now, let's talk about this, as briefly or quickly as possible. Why is Trump's boycott being framed as a white genocide stunt? And what does that narrative do to the credibility of the U.S. at a summit that now has to go on without its biggest economy?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So, framing the boycott around this widely discredited white genocide claim undermines the seriousness of the U.S. In this case here. It shifts away attention from substantive issues here. And when the world's largest economy steps back in this way, it just weakens the U.S. credibility. To the second part of your question, this claim has been disputed by researchers, diplomats, and even previous U.S. administrations. So now it's resurfaced. It just provides some dramatic justification for disengagement from the summit. To the second part of your question, Ulajay, I think that the problem here is relying on an unverified narrative at a global forum, undercuts the U.S. Image to the world. The U.S. is known as a fact-driven actor, so this kind of just weakens America's credibility and it creates room for questioning.
Now, we have the news just dropping in from the COP30 talking about Brazil failing to secure new pledges to cut fossil fuels. Seems like a lot of decisions being made there with the 19 on ground. But South Africa pushed a climate-focused agenda that the U.S. openly rejects. How does the absence of the world's largest emitter reshape the G20's ability to deliver any, meaningful climate commitments?
Well, the weight of the absence becomes very clear. The United States, over time, has shaped every major climate agreement from Paris to the just energy transition partnerships that directly involve South Africa. And without the participation of the United States, you lose technical expertise here. You also lose financing capacity and the likes and political leverage. But South Africa, can still lead the conversation. And I was watching the opening today. The show is going on. The beat is continuing without the U.S. presence there. And others will contribute, other member states, that is. But the final outcome here depends on, how they manage it. And of course, if it tends to be more aspirational, when the resources and policies that they have, the commitments, come together from a fully engaged U.S. But the U.S. is not collaborating. The U.S. says the theme does not align with its policy. So, there's a crack, but we'll just see how it comes together.
Now, do you believe, from what you just said, do you believe that the United States' absence will create any impacts, decisions that will be made at the G20 or COP30?
Absolutely. The U.S. I mean, it's the, largest, I would say funder with them. It will make an impact, but again, nature abhors vacuum. The president, Cyril Ramaphosa, said he will be handing over to an empty chair. It is what it is. The show will continue. The impact will be felt, but what has to be done will be done.
Now, the draft declaration was finalized without the United States input. Does that signal a new G20 minus America order? And what are the long-term implications for consensus building in the bloc?
So I don't think so. And I say that to the second part of the question you just asked me. If the U.S. does not endorse this final declaration, I think it's going to limit how much it can be translated into concrete action. Many of the financing tools that they have there, many of the incentives and policy mechanisms rely on participation from the United States. At this point, without that backing, the declaration carries just more political weight than practical effect because it needs the United States on board. I did say earlier that other countries can contribute, other member states can contribute and still move forward. But without the United States, the approach will be slow. The impact will be felt, and of course, it will not have the traction needed if if the U.S. The traction needed to achieve things in a timely manner if the U.S. was involved.
So I asked that question because I mean there are other big world superpowers at this summit, and they are taking advantage of, having to negotiate with Africa. And the
Mhm.
United States do need these collaborations. I mean, you do know that they've slammed a lot of tariffs on these African nations or developing nations. So we cannot say for a fact because these world leaders, superpowers like China, others are taking advantage of the G20 or the COP30. So how would, placing or juxtaposing that with the decisions that's been made there, how impactful would the US's absence be with these big world powers wanting to take over?
Well, I did say nature was vacuum. Currently, China and Russia are making an inway into the African continent. They are moving quickly to offer loans, investments, and security cooperation. And South Africa on its own is not without leverage, Olije. I think that they maintain diverse partnerships and of course, strong institutions here. But by engaging broadly, they can avoid dependence on any single partner at this point. The presidency is running out with this summit, but I think that moving on, they have to, whoever, well, the U.S. is next. They would need to keep room for open future cooperation with all member states in the G20.
Now, let's move to Trump. Trump has threatened to host next year's summit at his Florida Golf Club. How does that, personalization of the presidency affect the procedural integrity of the, rotating G20 chair?
Hosted it and his yes, well, honestly, I genuinely pray that never becomes reality. It's not just about choosing a venue. It touches on public interests, institutional integrity, and of course the trust that holds this or that binds this successful meetings together. Hosting a summit in a leader's private club or home is just plainly improper. The G20 is meant to be a neutral space for serious negotiation. When a proposed venue here looks connected to private interest, it complicates the optics and raises questions about fairness here. Democratic norms, of course, draw a clear line between public office and private business. So, with safeguards, of course, to prevent any, conflict of interest. The G20 on its own here has a guidance, and their guidance is very clear, specific, really, on avoiding, the appearance of self-dealing. So that decision, you know, whatever decision Trump makes has to be in the interest of the public. Beyond legality, member states need to also trust that the chair is being fair and acting for common good, not just to enrich himself. Once that confidence is shaken, bargaining becomes harder. Attendance can even be affected. More people may boycott, and the authority needed to guide through this tough negotiations will be weakened. So for the United States that has always prided on integrity, credibility, for them to lead on, credibly on this global platform, it must uphold these rules, ensuring that the summit is guided by principle and not personal interest. With that said, I pray it never holds on Trump's golf course. It's just
Fingers
it
crossed.
should.
It actually does sound like a personal business. I understand where you're coming from. Now, finally, before I let you go, I can't, have this conversation, or we can't have this conversation without bringing the African Union. The African Union now has a permanent seat at G20, summit. Does the U.S. boycott accelerate the AU's influence, and what does that mean for Western strategic interests in Africa?
What does the boycott mean, or what does the role of the AU? Can
The
you
role of the
rephrase that
EU, they now have
question?
a permanent seat at the
Um,
G20, summit. So
yes.
does the U.S. boycott accelerate AU's influence, and what does that mean for West African strategic interests in Africa?
Um, the AU really has to rise up to occasion, really, with with them stepping back. Yes, it may look like it's taking more significance, but it means that countries now have to engage directly with the African priorities instead of just going through traditional intermediaries. The AU on its own has to rise up, not just having a seat at the table. They have to put their seat to work. They have to put their voice there to work. Africa is increasingly shaping the global agenda, and I think that it's on the table now. It's a grab all, for the AU. So I would love to see them, regardless of Trump's boycott or not. But I think the AU being at that in that forum, having the parliament seat there, should really rise up to the occasion. For Western countries on the table here, I think it's a reminder that respectful, consistent engagement with the African institutions is very essential. And of course, it falls on the AU to drive that as it sits on the table there.
All right. Thank you so much, Joy John, for joining from Washington to talk about the COP30 that is currently going on without the United States present.